Warning, this content may be upsetting or disturbing to some audiences. Reddit: what is the creepiest true event in recorded history with some significance? The story of Delphine LaLaurie is still one of the most horrifying and unnerving things that comes to mind when we're talking about SHT that actually happened. She was a socialite in Louisiana who tortured and maimed her slaves. The slave later said she started the fire as a way to kill herself. When police entered the house following the fire, they found slaves who were maimed due to all kinds of effed up experiments LaLaurie had been doing on them. People had their limbs removed and reattached and stuff like that. The so-called Sea Peoples. They were supposedly raiders around 3,000 years ago who used the Mediterranean to attack coastal settlements and in some cases advanced cultures such as the Egyptians. No one has been able to say with a credible degree of accuracy who they were or where they came from. Then they just kind of disappeared. One of the creepiest quotes about them comes from a translated artifact of the day: "No land could stand before their arms," but my personal favorite is the dancing plague of 1518. For some odd reason a woman by the name of Truffa began dancing in Strasbourg, then so did everyone else. Some of the afflicted even died of exhaustion and heart attacks. It was pretty well documented as well by the local authorities, doctors, and church officials. Then it stopped after a month. Maybe a case of mass hysteria? Who knows? The disappearance of Frederick Valentich is weird as hell. Basically he was the pilot of a light aircraft in Australia who began radioing back to the nearest tower that there was something that was following him around in the sky. His last message was recorded as "It's directly over me." No wreckage was ever found. The story of Jeannie the feral child is one of the most disturbing I've ever read. Jeannie was born in 1957, and only 20 months old when her father Clark Wally, who, thinking she was mentally retarded, locked her up in one of the family's bedrooms. The room was located at the back of the house. For nearly 11 years, she suffered at the hands of her sadistic father, locked to the chair with a homemade strapping device and hit with a 1x3-foot board each time she made a noise. She wasn't able to speak, made animal noises, wasn't able to walk. I don't know how anyone could do that to a child. The East Area Rapist/Original Night Stalker. The recording is creepy enough. But also knowing he most likely was on or around his victims' property days leading up to his crimes and watching and learning these people unknown to them. No one was ever found guilty. Creepy indeed. H.H. Holmes is pretty effed up, also more so because they have no idea of the numbers he really may have killed on his house that was built to be a killing chamber. Not really any significance, but the Silent Twins is a pretty strange story. David Parker Ray, aka the Toy Box Killer, was a suspected serial killer and known serial kidnapper and rapist. From his Wikipedia article, Ray sexually tortured and presumably killed his victims in a $100,000 homemade torture chamber he called his toy box, that he built out of an old mobile home and equipped with what he referred to as his friends: whips, chains, pulleys, straps, clamps, leg spreader bars, surgical blades, and saws. Inside the torture room, along with numerous sex toys, torture implements, syringes, and detailed diagrams showing different methods and techniques for inflicting pain, there was a homemade electrical generator that was used for torture. He has been said to have wanted his victims to see everything he was doing to them during the torture sessions. Ray would often have a recorded audio tape of himself played for his victims whenever they regained consciousness. You can actually find the recorded audio tape and transcripts on YouTube, but they are extremely unsettling and not for the squeamish. Daisy's Destruction, a video by Peter Scully where a man and a woman sexually torture a young girl, saw off her limbs and then slit her throat. I've never seen the video, but the pictures alone were effed up enough for me. A lot of people are familiar with the bubonic plague, but the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 is often overlooked. It's thought to have spawned the fairy tale story of Hansel and Gretel because people were quite literally abandoning and or eating children in their desperation to find food. Millions still died from starvation. Tom and Eileen Lonergan, left at sea when their scuba diving charter forgot them and left them out on the Great Barrier Reef. Just the thought of it freaks me out. With sharks, hypothermia and drowning, I can't imagine the terror they went through in their final hours. I don't know if it has a huge amount of significance, but the Tamam Shud case was sure as hell creepy. From what I have read, that he actually was going to release info on UFOs, but after a meeting, he was visually shaken and crying. As if he was told something very disturbing. While I never thought of his presidency as a success, as a human being, he is a stand-up guy. Personally, I think he did C1 and whatever he was told, must have scared him shitless. Keep in mind, that he worked with Admiral. There was the dolphin-slash-human cohabitation experiment that ended in interspecies fornication. Bear Brook murders. A body of a woman and child are found in a metal barrel in 1985. Then in 2000 another barrel is found less than 300 feet away with the bodies of 2 more children. When DNA testing is done, 2 of the 3 children are related to the women. The creepiest part is the second barrel was either placed there after the investigation of the original barrel or was there the whole time and was never found. Many things done by Japan during World War II. Some Wikipedia articles to start you off on the most disgusting Wikipedia rabbit hole you'll ever go down are the Nanking Massacre, Comfort Women, and Unit 731. Have fun? The Tuskegee Experiment. In 1932, poor black people in the United States were purposefully infected with syphilis by the government. Then the disease was allowed to run rampant even when a cure was available, and the researchers just recorded all the shitty things that happened to the victims. In the 60s, a whistleblower called for the study to be terminated, but the CDC argued that it was important to continue the study until all subjects have died. Hinterkaifeck. A few days prior to the crime, farmer Andreas Gruber told neighbors about discovering footprints in the snow leading from the edge of the forest to the farm, but none leading back. He also spoke about hearing footsteps in the attic and finding an unfamiliar newspaper on the farm. 6 months earlier, the previous maid had left the farm, claiming that it was haunted. The new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrived on the farm on 31st of March, only a few hours before her death. Exactly what happened on that Friday evening cannot be said for certain. It is believed that the older couple, as well as their daughter Victoria and her daughter Kazilia, were somehow all lured into the barn one by one, where they were killed. On the following Tuesday, the 4th of April, some neighbors went to the farmstead because none of the inhabitants had been seen for several days, which was rather unusual. The postman had noticed that the post from the previous Saturday was still where he had left it. The police first suspected the motive to be robbery, and interrogated several inhabitants from the surrounding villages, as well as traveling craftsmen and vagrants. The robbery theory was, however, abandoned when a large amount of money was found in the house. The death of Carl Gabriel, Victoria's husband who had been reported killed in the French trenches in 1914, was called into question. His body had never been found. The following day, on the 5th of April, court physician Dr. Johann Baptist Allmuller performed the autopsies in the barn. It was established that a pickaxe was the most likely murder weapon. The corpses were beheaded, and the skulls sent to Munich, where clairvoyants examined them without result. Lying in the straw, next to the bodies of her grandparents and her mother, she had torn her hair out in tufts. The murder of James Bolger in Britain. More sickening than creepy. President James Buchanan and the death of his fiancée. Her death is shrouded in mystery. Buchanan told her father that he had a letter which would explain everything and it would be revealed at the time of his Buchanan death. Then on his deathbed, Buchanan had the letter destroyed. I don't have sources for this and I'm at work, but I'm sure someone more savvy than I could find it. I can't recall his name, but there was a man in 1910 who took a young girl to a house in the countryside where she picked flowers. He then took her inside the house, tied her up and raped her before strangling her to death. He then proceeded to cook her and eat her over the course of 9 days. He also kidnapped a young homosexual man, tied him up in a barn for several days where he beat him repeatedly, before cutting off his penis and kissing him goodbye. The Dyatlov Pass incident. It's been in the news recently again. The Lore podcast is really good for creepy true stories if you're looking for something. The guy's weird-ass emphasis on certain words grates the nerves after a while, but the show is addictive and makes your skin crawl. The Hinterkaifeck murders. Shit's crazy creepy. The history of Burkittsville, Maryland is particularly creepy. In the late 1700s, Irish immigrant lady was accused of bloodletting some children and was banished as a witch. She was presumed to have died of exposure in the woods. Some decades later, witnesses reported a ghostly hand pulling a young girl into a creek, drowning her. The creek was noted to be clogged with oily bundles of sticks for some time after. In the 1880s, a young girl claimed to have been led into a house in the woods by an old woman whose feet never touched the ground. The old woman told the girl to stay put and that she would be right back. Hours went by, the old woman did not come back, and the young girl ran home terrified. Now let me tell you about Coffin Rock. It's the creepiest part of this whole thing. You see, when the girl went missing, a search party was dispatched to find her, but unlike the girl, they did not come back. So they sent a second search party to find them. The bodies mysteriously disappeared by the time police arrived. In the 1940s, a hermit living in the woods killed 6 or 7 children, claiming an old lady ghost forced him to do it. He would usually take 2 kids at a time, forcing one to stand facing the corner while he killed the other. He was arrested, tried, and hanged. Fast forward to 1994. 3 student filmmakers venture into the woods to make a documentary about these events. They were never seen again, but a year later their footage was found buried deep in the foundation of a colonial-era house. Normally I wouldn't buy a UFO story because the people who report them are usually UFO chasers or fanatics, but the Phoenix Lights case was reported by thousands of people while it was happening, so it's hard to say there wasn't something going on. Maybe not aliens. I think if aliens were truly here for that long they'd have done something or left by now, but it could have easily been something that they weren't supposed to see. MK Ultra, anyone? This will probably get buried by now, which, honestly, is probably for the best, but by far the creepiest thing I've ever heard of is the death of Hisashi Ouchi, a nuclear reactor technician who died after a criticality accident at the Tokaimura nuclear plant in 1999. Ouchi and another technician had been instructed to mix a batch of highly enriched uranyl nitrate in water, but because of water's excellent neutron moderating properties, the mixture quickly went critical and flooded the room in intense neutron and gamma radiation. Now at this point, I think it's probably worth pausing to say a few words about radiation poisoning. Radiation is f***ing scary, and Ouchi was slapped with neutron radiation, which is arguably the worst kind. This isn't a huge deal for simple stuff like water molecules, but it's absolutely devastating for your DNA. Cells handle DNA damage through a process called apoptosis, which is basically a controlled form of cell suicide that keeps ruined DNA from being passed on when a cell divides. When Ouchi arrived at the hospital after first exposure, he probably felt relatively well, as more and more of his cells died over the following days. However, Ouchi's life would become more and more of a nightmare. 10 days after first exposure he could no longer speak. A few days later, his large intestine was gone. Elizabeth Báthory and 4 collaborators were accused of torturing and killing hundreds of young women between 1585 and 1610. The highest number of victims cited during Báthory's trial was 650. Basically, she killed hundreds of young girls in a variety of highly sadistic ways, and when she was found out, she just got sent to her room. Roanoke Island. Caspar Hauser. On May 26, 1828, a teenage boy appeared in the streets of Nuremberg, Germany. He carried a letter with him addressed to the captain of the 4th Squadron of the 6th Cavalry Regiment, Captain von Wessenig. The letter stated that the boy would now like to be a cavalryman as his father was, and invited the captain either to take him in or to hang him. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.